Have you ever seen someone struggle, doing everything they can to help their family, only to realize the world doesn't always reward kindness? This is the story of a young boy who counted every single coin he saved, hoping to buy a simple gift for his mother. But just when it seemed like his efforts wouldn't be enough, a well-known man, someone the world admires, noticed. What he did next shocked everyone. Today's story is about a moment of kindness, a reminder that real generosity isn't always loud, it's found in quiet, unexpected places. Stay with us to see how a single act can change a life. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what's the most selfless thing someone has ever done for you? The sun hung low over the city, casting long golden streaks across the pavement. It was the kind of evening when the streets buzzed with life, cars honking, people rushing home, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from a nearby bakery. Among the many faces in the crowd, there was one that stood out. A boy, no older than 10, sat on the steps outside a convenience store. His clothes were neat but worn, his small hands carefully counting a handful of coins. Every now and then, he would pause, sigh, and start over, as if hoping the total would somehow change. Inside the store, a tall man leaned against the counter, watching. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in an expensive jacket, with polished shoes that barely made a sound on the floor. He had just paid for his drink with a crisp bill, barely glancing at the change the cashier handed him. Money was nothing to him, just a tool, something he used without a second thought. The boy outside, however, treated each coin like treasure. He turned them over, one by one, as though their worth depended on how carefully he handled them. The man stepped outside, taking a sip of his drink. He raised an eyebrow at the boy. "Kid, what are you doing?" The boy looked up, startled. "I'm saving. For my mom." The man smirked. "Saving? For what?" "A gift," the boy said, his voice quiet but certain. "Something special. She's always giving me things, but I've never given her anything." The man laughed, shaking his head. "With that?" He pointed at the small pile of coins. "Kid, you'll need a miracle to buy anything worth giving." The boy's grip tightened around the coins, but he didn't argue. He just lowered his head and kept counting. The man took another sip, amused. "You know, there are two kinds of people in this world," he said, tilting his head. "People who dream big and people who waste time on small hopes. You might want to figure out which one you are." The word stung, but the boy didn't react. He simply gathered his coins, placed them carefully into his pocket, and stood up. At that moment, another voice joined the conversation, a voice that was calm, steady, and familiar to millions. "You're wrong," it said. Both the man and the boy turned. Standing there, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket, was Keanu Reeves. The man blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, you're..." But Keanu's eyes were on the boy. He crouched down, meeting him at eye level. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy said softly. Keanu smiled. "Ethan, tell me, why is this gift so important to you?" Ethan hesitated, then answered, "Because she's always working. Always tired. She never buys things for herself. I want her to have something nice." Keanu nodded, as if those words carried more weight than anything he had heard all day. Then, he turned to the man. "You said there are two kinds of people, right?" He stood up, hands in his pockets. "I think you missed a third kind. The ones who don't measure worth by money." The man opened his mouth, but no words came. Keanu glanced back at Ethan. "Come with me. Let's find something your mom will love." And just like that, everything changed. Ethan hesitated for a moment before following Keanu into the store. His small fingers clenched around the coins in his pocket as if they might disappear at any second. He had never imagined someone like Keanu Reeves would be standing beside him, treating him like his mission mattered. The man who had mocked Ethan scoffed, watching them with amusement. "Oh, this should be interesting," he muttered under his breath. He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Let's see what kind of special gift a handful of pennies can buy." Ethan ignored him, focusing on the rows of items ahead. There were perfumes in glass bottles, soft scarves, jewelry that sparkled under the store lights. Everything looked expensive. His stomach sank. Keanu walked beside him, calm and patient. "What does your mom like?" Ethan bit his lip. "She always says she likes simple things. But I want her to have something nice. Something she'd never buy for herself." Keanu nodded. "Good thinking. Let's keep looking." Ethan's eyes landed on a delicate necklace, a silver chain with a tiny heart pendant. It wasn't the flashiest piece in the store, but it was elegant, timeless. He checked the price tag. His heart dropped. It cost more than all the coins in his pocket combined. The man smirked, stepping forward. "That one? You'd have better luck buying a pack of gum." Ethan's face burned, but he refused to give up. He turned to the cashier, standing behind the counter. "Excuse me," he said politely, "do you have anything like this, but smaller?" The cashier glanced at Keanu, then at Ethan. Something in her expression softened. She walked to a different section, picked up a smaller necklace, still simple, still beautiful, and placed it on the counter. Ethan reached into his pocket, carefully placing his coins down one by one. He counted in a whisper, his fingers trembling slightly. The man let out a low chuckle. "This is painful to watch." He shook his head, pulling out his own wallet. "You know what? Here, kid. Let me make it easy for you." He slapped a crisp bill onto the counter, far more than what Ethan needed. The gesture was anything but kind. His smirk made it clear, he wasn't helping, he was humiliating. Ethan stared at the money, his hands still resting on his small pile of coins. He knew what this was. A test. A way to remind him of his place. Keanu saw it too. Ethan looked up at the man, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No, thank you." The smirk disappeared. "You're joking," the man scoffed. "You're struggling to scrape together a few bucks, and you're saying no to free money?" Ethan swallowed, choosing his words carefully. I want to buy it myself." The man laughed, but it wasn't amused anymore, it was cold. "Pride won't get you anywhere, kid." Keanu finally spoke. "Maybe not. But character will." The man turned to him, exasperated. "Oh, come on. You can't seriously think." Keanu's voice was steady. "You think wealth is about how much you have. But real wealth is knowing the value of what you give." The words hung in the air. The man scoffed again, but there was something different now. A flicker of uncertainty in his expression. Ethan took a deep breath, standing taller than before. He turned back to the cashier. "Can you hold this for me?" She smiled. "Of course." He clenched his fist around the remaining coins. He wasn't done yet. He would find a way to earn the rest. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a nod. "I think we've got some work to do." Ethan nodded back. He wasn't giving up. Not now. Behind them, the man stood motionless, watching them walk out of the store. For the first time, he wasn't laughing. Ethan and Keanu stepped out of the store, the cool evening air brushing against their faces. Ethan still had the small handful of coins in his pocket, but something had changed. He wasn't just a boy trying to buy a gift anymore, he was determined to find a way to make it happen. Keanu walked beside him, thoughtful. "How much more do you need?" Ethan hesitated. "A few dollars." Keanu nodded, glancing around the busy street. Then, his eyes landed on a small coffee shop nearby. How about we earn it? Ethan blinked. Earn it? Keanu grinned. Yeah. Ever bust tables before? Ethan shook his head, but he followed Keanu inside. The small cafe was filled with the warm scent of coffee and fresh pastries. The owner, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked up as they entered. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized Keanu, but he gave her a small, knowing smile, one that said, "Let's keep this quiet." He gestured toward Ethan. "Think we could help out for a bit? He's saving up for something important." The woman didn't hesitate. "Of course." Ethan rolled up his sleeves, eager. He cleared tables, wiped them down, and even helped carry trays. The work wasn't easy, but he didn't mind. Every dish he picked up, every step he took, it all got him closer to his goal. Across the street, the man from the store leaned against his car, watching. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. Why was Keanu Reeves, one of the most recognizable stars in the world, helping a random kid clean tables? Minutes turned to an hour, and when Ethan finally wiped his hands on his jeans, the cafe owner handed him a few crisp bills. "That should do it," she said warmly. Ethan's face lit up. "Thank you." Keanu ruffled his hair. "Come on, let's go get that necklace." They walked back into the store. The man was still there, arms crossed, waiting. His smirk had returned. "Really? You spent an hour cleaning tables just to scrape together a few extra bucks?" Ethan ignored him and went straight to the counter. The cashier smiled as she placed the necklace in a small box. The moment Ethan handed over his hard-earned money, Keanu spoke. "You know, I've been thinking." He turned toward the man. "You act like money makes the rules. But I'm curious, do you even know who you're talking to?" The man frowned. "What?" Keanu gestured toward Ethan. "This kid. Do you know who he is?" The man let out a short laugh. "Yeah. He's a kid who wasted time picking up dirty plates instead of taking free money." Keanu's smile didn't waver. "Wrong." He crouched down next to Ethan. "Tell him your last name." Ethan looked up, confused. "Reeves," he said quietly. The man's smirk vanished. Keanu stood up. "Ethan is my nephew." Silence. The man stared, his brain scrambling to process what he had just heard. His face drained of color. "Wait. You're saying?" Keanu nodded. "And you just spent the last hour mocking him. Telling him his dreams were too small. Treating him like he didn't matter." The weight of those words hit the man like a punch to the chest. His arrogance crumbled. His throat tightened. Ethan looked at him, not with anger, but with something far worse, understanding. The man swallowed hard. He had been wrong. And now, there was no undoing it. The man's throat felt dry. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Ethan, then back at Keanu. His usual confidence had vanished. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Ethan held the small gift box tightly in his hands, but there was no bitterness in his expression. No anger. Just quiet understanding. The man exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, kid. I didn't know. If I had," he stopped himself. The truth was, it shouldn't have mattered. Whether Ethan was Keanu Reeves' nephew or just any other boy trying to buy a gift, he had still treated him like he was beneath him. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Would it have made a difference? The man swallowed hard. "Yeah. I mean, no. I don't know." He sighed, dragging a hand down his face. "I was a jerk. I thought I was teaching you a lesson. But maybe I was the one who needed it. Keanu crossed his arms, watching the man carefully, waiting to see where this was going. The man took a slow breath, his voice quieter now. Look, kid. I grew up believing money was everything. That if you didn't have enough, you didn't matter. But I see now, you weren't just trying to buy a necklace. You were showing your mom how much you love her. And you didn't want it handed to you. You wanted to earn it. Ethan gave a small nod. The man hesitated before speaking again. I respect that. Ethan studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. He smiled. A small, genuine smile. You know, it's never too late to change. The man let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Wise words from a kid. He sighed, rubbing his hands together. I'm sorry, Ethan. Really. And Keanu, he stopped himself again, unsure how to even address the man he had unknowingly been arguing with. I guess I've got a lot to think about. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm. Yeah. You do. The man took one last glance at Ethan, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out the crisp bill he had offered before and placed it on the counter. Not as charity, he said. But as my first step toward being better. Ethan looked at the money, then back at the man. He didn't need it anymore. But maybe, just maybe, the man needed to give it. With a small nod, Ethan picked it up. Not for himself, but for something bigger. I'll use it for someone who really needs it. The man blinked, surprised. Then, slowly, he smiled. For the first time, he understood. Ethan held the money for a moment, staring at it in his hands. He could have kept it, used it for something more, but deep down, he knew there was someone who needed it more than him. He turned toward the cashier, who had been quietly watching everything unfold. Do you know anyone who could use this? He asked. The cashier's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Actually, there's a man who comes in sometimes. He's been struggling. Lost his job, barely has enough to eat. Ethan nodded without hesitation. Then give it to him. The man who had mocked him earlier stood in silence, watching as Ethan gave away the money he had just received. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. You're something else, kid. Ethan smiled. My mom always says the best gifts aren't the ones you buy. They're the ones that show you care. Keanu chuckled softly, glancing at the man. Smart mom. The man exhaled slowly. For years, he had believed wealth was power, that the world revolved around those who had the most. But here was this boy, someone with almost nothing, giving away what little he had without hesitation. He felt something stir in his chest, something unfamiliar. Maybe guilt. Maybe admiration. Maybe both. Ethan turned to leave, his small gift box clutched tightly in his hands. But before he stepped outside, he paused and looked back at the man. You know, Ethan said, if you ever want to learn how to give, you don't have to start big. Just, start. The man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. But as Ethan and Keanu walked out the door, he found himself staring at the cashier, then at the register. After a long pause, he reached into his wallet, pulled out another bill, and quietly slid it toward her. For the guy who needs it, he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. The cashier smiled. That's a good start. And for the first time in a long time, the man felt lighter. Ethan and Keanu stepped out of the store, the small gift box held tightly in Ethan's hands. The night air was crisp, carrying the quiet hum of the city around them. But inside Ethan's heart, there was warmth, a feeling that went beyond the gift he had just bought. He had come here believing that money was the only thing standing between him and making his mother happy. But he was leaving with something far greater, a lesson about kindness, perseverance, and the power of giving, even when you have little to spare. Keanu glanced down at him with a knowing smile. You did good today. Ethan looked up, thoughtful. I didn't do much. Keanu shook his head. You did more than you think. You didn't just buy a gift for your mom. You reminded someone that kindness still exists. And that? That's priceless. Ethan smiled. Meanwhile, back in the store, the man stood motionless, watching them leave. His fingers tapped against the counter, his mind racing. He had walked into that store believing he was better than the kid who couldn't afford a necklace. But now, as he stood there, he realized that wealth had nothing to do with money, it was about what you chose to do with what you had. For the first time in years, he saw himself clearly. And he didn't like what he saw. With a slow breath, he turned to the cashier and pulled out his wallet. He handed her another bill, this time, not out of arrogance, but out of a quiet, newfound understanding. If that guy ever needs another meal, make sure he gets one. The cashier gave him a small smile. I think you're starting to get it. The man let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Maybe. As Ethan and Keanu walked down the street, the city lights glowing around them, Keanu spoke one last time. You know, people remember wealth for a moment, but they remember kindness forever. Ethan nodded, gripping the small box in his hands. And as they disappeared into the night, one thing was certain, this story wasn't just about a gift. It was about the unseen value in every choice we make.